This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Shift 5 and W2 Communications. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the Internet of Medical Things gets a security makeover at the Department of Veterans Affairs, stopping location fakers before they fake out the U.S. military, and creating a two-way street for discussion with industry for CMS. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Department of Veterans Affairs is the biggest buyer of medical devices in the country. Many of those devices are connecting to networks now, so the department is focusing more on the security of those devices. Amber Pearson is Deputy Chief Information Security Officer and Senior Executive Director of Information Security Policy and Strategy in the Office of Information and Technology at VA. At HIMSS 2024 in Orlando recently, she tells me security isn't just about tech devices anymore.
Essentially, it is about anything that's connected to the network, having access through the network, whether you're connecting through your Bluetooth, your phones. And as we look at healthcare technology, it's really advanced in this space where everything is connected nowadays. You have wearable technology, and that increases the attack surface. And so for cybersecurity professionals, it's very important for us to make sure we're moving at the speed of innovation. So one of the things that in VA that we started looking at is how do we protect those medical devices? How do we ensure that those communication protocols that are feeding back into a larger healthcare system, how do we protect the data? How do we minimize the risk around that? So yes, that is the same.
What's similar and what's different about securing a medical device versus some other type of device that goes on a network?
I will say what's similar is the fact that you've now increased the attack surface. So whenever we look at things that are connected, we always look at how is it communicating, what is it attached to, and then what data is actually stored, and how is it being protected. So it's similar in that fashion, but it gets different on the complexity of how to protect it. Medical devices, one of the things that we look for in our partners with our vendors is how do we get secure by design? How do we get secure by default? And what that essentially means is when I buy a device, does it already have the inherent security principles embedded within that? And how do I actually make sure I can now connect and attach it to the patient care delivery? Ultimately, we're trying to make sure we have that balance between ensuring that we are having it available for patient care and then also ensure that we're protecting the patients. So we try to equate those two things. Healthcare delivery and security has to come together.
What's the security implication for putting a lot of devices on a network that you don't have complete control over? You don't necessarily know where those devices are. You don't know when they're being used. There are a lot of variables, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that we look at is internet security agreements. And those ISAs actually tells us how the devices are being connected, what data is being transmitted, and it allows us the opportunity to understand exactly how to protect it. So it becomes very important in VA to understand the contracts, making sure we understand the vendors understand our security expectations to do business with us. And as the largest healthcare provider in the nation, it is very important that we get a good handle on how we're securing those medical devices to make sure that we're protecting our veterans and their families and caregivers.
So regarding the data, is the data protection that's necessary, the data security that's necessary for a medical device, similar to what's necessary in other parts of you handle a lot of PII, you handle a lot of user medical information. So obviously you have those standards and practices in place, but I wonder if that looks different for the medical devices specifically than for the rest of the landscape that you cover.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important distinction. It is similar when we think about what is PII, what is personal identifiable information. It's the same standard definition, and that's what you'll find in those medical devices and things that are attached to those medical systems. So it's similar in the definition and understanding how to protect it. The most important piece, and I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, was the complexity of how to do that. So I could have something connected, let's say a bedside monitor, for example. If I look at that bedside monitor, there's usually a level of protection where it can only connect to so much. And so usually you don't get that in the other larger data centers, other IT areas, because it's by design. And so that's where it gets a little bit more complex.
Does each device present the same potential risk to the network that the next device does? or does that vary based on the complexity of the device, the function that it performs, so on?
It varies. It varies on the complexity. Most importantly, it varies on the type of data. So not all data is treated the same. And so in BA, we have our standard categorization of high impacting system, meaning that maybe it has PHI, PII type data. And so we tend to prioritize those a little differently than we would with something that doesn't have any financial or personal identifiable information embedded within it. So there are different levels of categorization. It goes back to the data itself that's being stored. And then the second piece I would say is the connection. What is it being connected to? Because you can have a system that doesn't store any data. It's just used as a transmission protocol or transmission system. But you could find that maybe it's attached to a larger database that hosts all, personal information about a person's date of birth, their social security numbers, et cetera. So it is looking at the full aspect of this entire system.
So it sounds like you're applying pretty much a standard risk management framework to all of this, assigning these kind of dots on a matrix to figure out how you address the risk and the way you manage. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, no, that's a fair observation. We do start with risk management framework. And one of the things about RMF, it allows you to tailor, right? So then when you're looking at the medical devices, you may see things that are just not applicable to that medical device, because when you look at the standard NIST security controls, it is typically formed to get after more data center type systems. So when you start looking at medical devices, you'll start seeing a difference and understanding how you need to just maybe tailor a little differently because you're looking at a different type of system.
What does the trend look like over time? I imagine just from walking around this show and seeing the complexity of some of the devices that are available here, some of the conditions that they're helping to treat and so on, that the complexity has grown. What else have you noticed about the trajectory that you've seen over time for the kinds of devices that you're dealing with?
Yeah, so the innovation in this space is awesome. I've been able to look around, seen a couple of cool different new ideas that are happening, but I immediately, as a security person, I go to, how is that connecting? What is that on the back end? Is there a third party vendor that's attached to that? So when I look at that, it is unique in this space because there's so many different possibilities here. And so one of the key aspects in that is just really understanding the system and understanding how to protect it. So it does get very complex when you start seeing new, exciting things. But I think one of the things that I like to do within Office of Information Security in the BA is, how do we get to yes when we're thinking about security? How do we allow this innovation to continue, to grow, and to really give that world-class service, but at the same time, be able to protect it adequately, right? So that's always a key aspect for us.
You talked about secure by design and secure by default a few minutes ago. Is it your sense as you go around and talk to people, not just here, but all over the place, that they understand that and that they're able to deliver that? Are you seeing more of that?
I'm seeing more of it. I think a big push over the last couple of years has been talking about it more. Our partners in CISO, FDA have also been a part of that same campaign. Hey, let's get to a point where we're secure by design, because that's where it essentially starts. And then also start looking at beyond that point, because if you start looking at secure by design, it costs less. You're no longer trying to add security to something that's already been built and designed, in our cases, FDA certified, and it makes it a little bit more difficult. So always trying to start there is important for us.
As you move forward on this, what do you expect to change as technology evolves, as the capabilities and some of the more complex symptoms that these devices will treat? How will all of that impact the way that you're going to try to plan security for the VA network?
Yeah, I think two important things. It's being able to move at the speed that the innovation is moving, that's very important. And then always taking that risk-based approach in how you prioritize security risk, ensuring that we're partnering with our vendors, our manufacturers, to make sure they understand the value of security and how we equate that to patient care delivery. That's going to be the two critical points.
You can read more about securing medical networks on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, stopping location fakers before they fake out the U.S. military. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Matt Jones from Sigma Defense Systems on innovation in government from West.
everybody's growing up digitally native now. And they come in and they get to a system, and the system has bandwidth challenges. You can't connect, you're not getting the data, it's not the right data to the right place at the right time. We really see connectivity as a place that innovation is going to be really important, and really data strategy as part of that. You need to have the right data moving over these challenge links and get it to the right places for decision making.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. Commercial aircraft across Europe and the Middle East report incidents where their GPS units are telling them they're not on the course they think they're on. So far, military aircraft haven't reported those kinds of incidents publicly. Ronak Shaw is Senior Director for Research at Shift 5. Ronak, welcome. Thanks for joining me. What is GPS spoofing, and how does it compare to some of the other issues with GPS that are potential national security threats?
Thank you, Francis, for having me on the show today. It's great to be here to talk about such an important issue. GPS spoofing involves creating false GPS signals that can deceive a GPS receiver into thinking it's in a different position or time. You may have heard of GPS jamming, which involves creating interference or noise at the same frequency as GPS signals. Ultimately, what this does is it prevents GPS receivers from being able to do navigation and timing-based operations.
The impact seems to be obvious. If an aircraft doesn't think it's going where it's actually going, or thinks it's going a different place, that's a big problem. How does that impact the national security spectrum?
Yeah, I think outside of our military operations, if you take a look at our critical infrastructure sectors here at home, such as aviation, energy, transportation, telecommunications, they all use systems that utilize GPS. Thankfully, a lot of GPS spoofing attacks have not been occurring here at home. We've been predominantly seeing them globally, particularly in conflict zones. The reason for this is the commoditization of GPS spoofing equipment, and this has led to the proliferation of this equipment and getting into the hands of our adversaries. This has led to their ability to conduct GPS spoofing attacks against military assets. Some of the unintended consequences of this have bled into the commercial industry as well, such as maritime and aviation. Our military depends on our civil air reserve fleet, as well as relies on our commercial aviation sector for transporting goods across the globe. If you can imagine a cargo aircraft veering off course, it could potentially not have enough fuel to land somewhere safely. Beyond just not being able to deliver those goods, it could potentially create geopolitical rifts as well.
What are all the security components of this that need to be tightened? Who needs to secure what in order to prevent this from seeping into military systems, the civil reserve fleet as you just described, and so on?
I think how we need to think about this problem is that we need to have better data across the board. The Department of Defense, I think, can stitch together different diverse data sets, including onboard data, to have better observability of these platforms. Ultimately, what this will allow is military leadership and, quite frankly, the industry at large to make better decisions around mitigation and prevention techniques.
What are the long-term steps that you see the Pentagon, civil organizations in government, and others doing to achieve what you just described? What do they have to do to get to that place that you just talked about?
I think there are a number of things that need to happen in order to get there. Like I mentioned, I think in order to have a better comprehensive understanding of GPS spoofing attacks, we need to keep pace with our adversaries and their capabilities. And so what we need to have is better observability of these platforms, the environments that surround them, to kind of understand how our adversaries are conducting these attacks. Ultimately, also, I think the DoD needs to invest in sort of the future of position, navigation, and timing technologies. But at the end of the day, without observability of these platforms and how GPS spoofing is impacting the various systems on board, we won't have a better understanding to improve the lethality, to provide this, improve the survivability and security of these platforms.
When you talk about knowing how the bad guys are doing it, what do we know about how the bad guys are doing it now? How granular of a body of knowledge do we have about the way that they do this?
Yeah, I think our military has been facing these attacks for a number of years now, and we're seeing this sort of bleed out into the commercial industry. And so there's quite a bit of knowledge around understanding GPS spoofing attacks. However, what we have seen also from industry is anti-jamming and anti-spoofing capabilities being baked into GPS receivers that ultimately get installed on these platforms. But this stops short of solving the problem completely. You need to have comprehensive data to be able to understand the problem more intimately.
Is there a way to judge success in this other than we continue to have no incidents?
I think we'll always continue to see incidents, even with new technologies. And that's why, right, going back to having a comprehensive data approach allows us to be able to understand how our adversaries are adapting to new technologies. There's this constant cat and mouse game that we're playing, right? And in order to always stay ahead of that, we need to be able to have the data to inform our decision makers to make intelligent decisions.
Ronak, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Francis. Thank you.
You can read more about GPS spoofing on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, creating a two-way street for discussion with industry at CMS. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Michael St. Cross on innovation in government from West.
The biggest opportunity, the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest security dollar that the missions can spend is on privilege management, not just an administrator, but that's the user side of it, but on the asset, on the endpoints. There's new things we can be doing there that eliminate the ability for local administration to take control of a system, for users that are overprivileged to be a hiding place for a nation state. And that's still the same tactic, technique, and procedure that we're seeing in the news and continually succeeding. So we need to really prioritize that.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. A number of federal leaders speaking about their areas of expertise was a featured part of the HIMSS conference in Orlando recently. But not all of the discussion there went one way. Andrea Fletcher's Chief Digital Strategy Officer and Director of the Digital Service for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. At HIMSS 2024, she tells me she didn't go there just to talk.
And what does it mean for the U.S. to have a digital strategy in a somewhat fragmented healthcare system? I don't think it's controversial to say that we have a fragmented healthcare system. And as the largest payer, I work for the largest payer in the system, Medicare. What is our role in supporting digital transformation or digital strategy and the adoption of technology? We're sitting in a showroom floor at a convention center that's just bursting with, innovation and technology, which is amazing. I mean, there's some incredible stuff here. At the same time, what do they need from us? Mm-hmm. What can we as the government provide? During the keynote speaker this morning, they talked about AI. I think you're going to hear a lot about AI. Have you heard about AI?
I've heard it, yes, a little bit.
Yeah, and how are we going to adopt it safely and securely and regulate the adoption? I think that's kind of where things are heading over the next 6 months. Mm-hmm. And as we kind of move into the next step of digital strategy and transformation at CMS, I kind of want to know what's going on out in the real world.
Yeah.
It's a good place to get a sense of it all.
What are they telling you about what their expectations and hopes are for what CMS can provide for them as far as those kinds of frameworks and strategies and so on?
I don't know. I'll figure some of that out tomorrow when I give my talk. I think so far we're hearing a lot about cybersecurity. How are we supporting hospitals and how are we supporting providers in cybersecurity? Over the past couple of weeks, the healthcare sector has been dealing with the Change Health hack. It's the colonial pipeline moment for the healthcare industry is kind of what everyone's been saying, which is that this is a major wake-up call for the American healthcare system that we are quite vulnerable. And, all of these different tools here trying to talk to each other creates gaps in our cybersecurity. And so how do we as HHS and CMS support, both really small, tiny providers that might not even be connected to the internet and huge, healthcare systems that are multi-state, crossing different states and are huge employers in areas and huge parts of the local economies. And so we have to deal with that whole spectrum of healthcare providers in America. And that's one of the things I'm trying to learn more about is what are the cybersecurity needs in this space? Because we as Medicare are, part of the claim systems, right? We pay out 4.5% of the US GDP every day through our claims processing system. So we are a major part of that entire ecosystem. And so that's some of the stuff I'm hearing is definitely cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, interoperability, which is always a hot topic in healthcare. So how are systems talking to each other? What are the data standards that we need in order to do that? I think the government plays a really key role in all of this in terms of data standards, because you can't do artificial intelligence unless you have good data. The data can't talk to each other if we don't have good data standards. And really the government, and particularly the federal government, is where a lot of that needs to come from. So that's what I'm hearing.
You mentioned your talk. It is titled Teaching the Elephant to Dance.
I had to give it a catchy name. There's a lot of talks here.
Well, I would say you succeeded. What's the significance of that? What does that mean?
So I started looking around of what is the definition of digital transformation? It's a big, in my job description, it said digital strategy, digital transformation, and modernization, small feats. Mm-hmm. And so I started to look into what that actually meant. And I kept coming across this phrase. It's in a couple of books. Depending on who you talk to, the management people will kind of have a different definition of it versus the technologists, which is taking something that's the elephant in the room, something that's big and cumbersome, and teaching it to be agile, teaching it to change quickly and to dance, right? And so I'm like, well, the government, we're kind of a big elephant in the room a lot of the times, but also CMS as an organization, we have 6,000 employees roughly, and tens of thousands of contractors who work with us, regional offices all over the country. So how do you take a $1 trillion large organization and teach it how to be agile and nimble? So both internally at CMS, but then also, the larger healthcare sector. What does it mean for healthcare to go through digital transformation? And what do we need in order to guide that in America and make it a wonderful experience, a delightful experience for the American people who, when they come to a hospital, don't really care what electronic health record system you're using. They just want to get the care that they need. Mm-hmm. And so how do we use digital transformation to, provide the best care for patients and the American people?
I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago that I thought was interesting. Yeah. Different people in different sectors have different definitions of digital transformation and what it means. What does that mean to the way that you and your colleagues in the federal government, not just at CMS, try to game that out, try to figure out how to build a strategy that could turn out to mean different things to different people?
I keep coming back to people. The federal government, in order to transform or to bring in the next generation of technology, we have to bring in the next generation of talent. And that's not always an easy sell. I'll be honest, I love working in the federal government. I don't think a lot of young people know that this is a career choice, especially if they're technologists that you can make, that you can choose to go into the federal government and build technology that touches every American's life, or millions of lives a day. And the mission, we always joke, come for the mission, stay for the people. But the mission is phenomenal. And there are really great people who work in the federal government every day trying to figure out, healthcare technology or whatever tech sector they're in or sector of the government. So the first off is just we have to try to hire, right? We have to hire better. We have to figure out how to bring in the best minds in the country in order to really think through what does this mean for healthcare in America.
Would I be correct in assuming that part of your mission here is a recruiting mission then?
Yeah, I'm always recruiting. Yeah. I mean, I want people, in order to understand, or in order to regulate this space, we need to find people who understand it and bring them in to help us figure out how are health insurance companies using artificial intelligence, and what does that mean for somebody who just got denied coverage, right? Or a patient who goes to a hospital and gets an unexpected medical bill. Like how are they actually doing that on the back end? What is the technology doing? And what do we need to do as a regulator in order to work within the technology systems that exist? In order to do that, you have to understand the technology that's there.
We just have a minute or so left.
Yeah.
What will you do with the information that you gather here when you go back to Washington and try to apply it to the things that we've talked about, developing policy, developing strategy frameworks, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll be talking a lot with my colleagues at CMS. We're having a senior leadership retreat about artificial intelligence and what that means, both from a federal government agency, how we're going to adopt it, but also how we're going to regulate it. And I think a huge part of what I'll be bringing back is, not just like, oh, look at this cool tool over here, but here are the trends that we're seeing. We're seeing, chatbot nurses for patients. We're seeing, I haven't walked the floor yet, so I don't actually really know what all is here. But I'm going to guess we're seeing a lot of stuff on, advanced data analytics and pulling together different data sources, such as genetic information and electronic health record information. And those are all spaces where HHS and CMS play a role in protecting patients, making sure that their information is secure, and also making sure that they're getting the best care possible using and adopting new technology. So I'm sure I'll have a lot of conversations.
You can read more about what Andrea is doing at CMS on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, thousands of Sea Service members are coming to Sea Air Space, the annual conference the Navy League presents. You heard about it a moment ago. It features more than 400 exhibitors, dozens of speakers from the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. It runs April 8th through 10th at the Gaylord at National Harbor, and I'll host the Chiefs panel to open Sea Air Space Monday morning with the Chief of Naval Operations, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and the Administrator of the Maritime Administration. You can read more about it and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching and have a great week.